again for joining us, being present for the Blue Ribbon Task Force on screen time. We are now moving into a very different phase. You have all read the book, The Anxious Generation. You've heard from some people in the field, experts. You've seen some research. You've all been discussing a lot of varying things, and now it's time to start writing the report. We started to go over the flow of how we'll write the report. So this next phase, of course, like every one of them, is very important, and it's going to be really important for you to listen today and participate today, as our co-chairs will go over the process by which we will be creating the report and voting on the report. As a reminder, this task force will provide recommendations to the State Board of Education. What they do with those recommendations is entirely up to them, but anything that the State Board does will simply be guidance to school districts, as there will not be authority for the State Board to tell a local board, you shall do this, but that the task force and or the State Board highly recommends that something be done. So with that, again, I welcome you and I thank you for your time and effort that you've already given and that you're going to continue to give over the next several weeks. I want to give some shout outs to some people that have volunteered, raised their hand and said, yes, we'll help you take notes in breakout sessions. Yes, we'll help lead those discussions. And so I want to thank some of our staff, Kaylee Taylor and Tiffany Littler and Marissa Seeley and others that have been just gracious with their time. They'll be joining us tonight, and then they will be exiting for the rest of the time, but we couldn't have done this work without them. So thank you all for your work. With that, it's time to kind of go through now the process by which we're going to be spending the next several weeks together. And Ava, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So just kind of to add on to what Dr. Watson said, we are going to spend our time today discussing what the future of this group looks like as we begin shifting into a new phase of our work. So we want to go over the schedule for our remaining meetings, give an outline of what the final report would kind of look like, and discuss how we will come to decisions for recommendations. So at the end of the meeting, the group is going to vote on these procedures.
All right, thank you, Ava. We're going to spend today, after this meeting, we'll begin discussing and voting on the specific recommendations that will go into the report. The schedule that you see on the screen now shows us doing discussion and voting on recommendations for each topic, focusing on one topic per week. It's really important to note this is the absolute slowest we can go, but if we find that our discussions are moving pretty quickly, we can cover more than one of these topics per week. So for example, if we get going into personal device recommendations next week and we find that we're flying through that, we'll be able to go ahead and jump right into mental health recommendations next week as well. So again, I want to stress this is the slowest we can go, the schedule that you see on your screen there, but we can move a little bit faster. As we're progressing through, you're going to note that on the 31st, on Halloween, we're not actually going to have a meeting, but we're going to spend time that week letting you go through and read a draft of the report. And then when we get to our final November 7th meeting, we're going to have time that we're going to actually go through and do a final reading of it and vote on adopting the report.
Thank you, Brian. So moving on to our next slide, which kind of talks about the outline of the report. It has a short introduction that will have some information about the purpose of the task force and how it was created. Then there will be a definitions section that will explain how certain words in the report are being used. So we have words like personal electronic devices or bell-to-bell policy, just to give the State Board an overview of what that means. Then there will be a section on research of each of the main topics, which will summarize the main points from the pre-readings each week, our readings from the Anxious Generation, Peyton's weekly presentations, and then other nationally recognized publications that we feel need to be in there. Finally, the recommendations section will contain all the recommendations that are successfully voted on by us as a task force. So we would like the body of the report to be no longer than 10 pages, not including the appendix. So one thing to note is that the task force responsibility is to decide what content and recommendations go into the report. Our job is not to do the technical writing process. That will fall on KSDE staff. So make sure that when we're commenting on this, that we're focusing on the substance of the text, not necessarily how it's being worded.
Okay, thank you, Ava. We're now going to focus on exactly how the group will make decisions on which recommendations we're going to include in the final report. By the end of the day, Monday, you can expect an email with a list of recommendations for each topic. The list is going to be based on common points from our breakout rooms that we've had over the last several weeks, pulled from the Anxious Generation book, and from the research that's been presented to us by our various experts. You're going to have a poll on which of these recommendations you want to discuss as a whole group and bring to a full vote. There will also be a fillable box for you to type additional recommendations that may have been missed when creating the survey. It's really important that you have this survey filled out by Wednesday so that we can move into the next phase, hearing everybody's voice and making sure that we have all of your thoughts and concerns addressed properly. When we begin the discussion for each of the topics, we will present a list of recommendations pertaining to that topic, as well as how many people voted to discuss it.
Awesome. Our next slide is going to talk about our breakout discussions. So we will continue to have these as we move into our new format. Each week we'll discuss the list of recommendations and give people the chance to explain why they agree or maybe disagree with certain ideas. We'll also be able to discuss pros and cons, maybe some unintended consequences, and who the audience should be. So, for example, there might be different recommendations for a high school student versus an elementary student, as well as what recommendations we would give to administration versus parents. So the point of the breakout groups is to just have specific discussions about proposed policies, not necessarily to reach a whole consensus amongst your breakout rooms.
All right, thank you, Ava. The next thing we're going to talk about is the voting process. After everyone's had a chance to discuss the different policy recommendations in the breakout groups, we will come back to the main room. Anyone on the task force will then be able to make a motion to vote on one of the recommendations, which will then need a second from another member. Once someone has made a motion, we will move into discussion as a whole group, which will be no longer than 10 minutes. At this point, we will take a vote on whether to adopt that recommendation. We will do so through voting on a poll on Zoom, and you will have the option to vote either yes, no, or to abstain. If a recommendation gets a majority of yes votes, it will be included as a recommendation in the final report. If the losing side of a vote had at least 25% of the members' support, but not able to reach majority, it will be included as a minority opinion in the report. Once voting is complete for that motion, a new motion would be in order, and we will repeat this process. It's really important that we want to stress you have to be present to cast your votes.
Thank you, Brian. Also, something to keep in mind is that once the meeting is finished, if the group voted to add recommendations to the report, you will receive a draft of the appropriate section to view. You will be able to add comments to the draft if there is something you believe needs to be edited, or if you want to be heard on a certain issue. As a reminder, these comments should be about the substance of the text, so we're not necessarily editing for grammar. You will have a couple of days to provide comments, and then the updated version of the draft will be shared again with the group. So just be sure to check your email for important dates and reminders. Before we move into the next section, are there any questions about what Brian and I have previously mentioned? Yes,
This is
Kim.
Kim. I have a question. Did I hear you right that the questions in this survey will come from the breakouts we've already had, or will it come from the breakout sessions today?
Great question, Kim. There will not be any breakout sessions today. They're going to come from the conversations that we've had previously. Also, they're going to be pulled from some of the research that the panelists have presented and from the Anxious Generation book itself.
Okay,
Great
so if we
question.
didn't say it at this point, it's too late.
Can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
Chair? Part of the survey you will get will ask you, did we miss any recommendations? And then we will compile all the we missed these recommendations and bring it back to everyone to see them. So we will make sure that everyone gets one in case it is not listed on the list that we've gathered.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jake.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Jake. Any other questions before we move into the next section?
Sue Bowley here, wondering when do we receive the survey and how soon do we send it back?
Sue, you should expect that in your email on Monday of next week. And we really need to have those filled out by Wednesday of next week at the very latest. Great question. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions before we move on? We want to make sure we get everything addressed.
We did receive a question in the chat, and Gabby will go through, and other KSDE staff will go through and try to answer your questions, so we can keep moving on with our agenda.
Okay, thank you, Ava.
Brian, I will pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through and vote on the procedures that we have outlined in this meeting so far. And as we do go through this process of voting on these procedures, one of the things we want you to really get a feel for how this works, because this is basically going to help us become familiar with the whole process that we're going to use in the future, making a motion and then seconding that motion and then opening it up for discussion and then finally voting on the motion. So we're going to go, like I said, we're going to go through the voting process to accept the procedures that Ava and I have laid out. If you have a motion, we'd like you to go ahead and raise your hand. We do have a sample motion on the screen, and then we would, once somebody's raised the motion, we'll have somebody to second that motion as well. So we would currently seek a motion regarding the procedures that have been presented. And again, there's an example of how to make that motion on the screen. So if somebody wants to use the raise hand feature in Zoom to make the first motion. Okay, Tanya.
I move that we use the procedures for the task force voting process and final report creation that were just presented to the committee.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Does somebody second that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, we got Carol, hand up.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. So the motion to pass the voting procedures that have been presented at this meeting have been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion? If so, please raise your hand. Chase, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Ava. My question is, since the motion was set out based on the motion is made, a second is made, and there's a 10-minute discussion maximum, I assume Robert's Rules of Order is not part of this process. So if the discussion takes forth and 8 minutes in, we decide, okay, maybe there's a consensus to go a different direction to gather more support. Does that mean we're not going to allow substitute motions? Does that mean we'll allow the original motion to fail if the group wants to go a different direction and then allow another motion to go forward? I'm just trying to think of, I guess that's my question. Are we using Robert's rules, or are we just going to stick with this very set process?
I can jump in on this one. We are going to allow the motion to continue to a vote. So we'll let the motion that was originally presented go through with the vote, and after the fact, we can have a substitute motion brought forward.
All right. Thank you, Gabby. Any other questions before we move on?
Okay, so since there is no more discussion, it is time to move on to voting. So you have the option to vote yes or no, or to abstain from the vote, and your poll should be coming up on your screen. And if you aren't getting that, be sure to raise your hand and we will make sure to get to you.
Would you mind repeating the motion?
Yes, absolutely. The motion was I move to use these procedures for the task force voting process and for the final report creation.
Thank you.
And I apologize. Can you repeat, based on what Chase was asking, can you repeat that whether or not we're able to steer off in a different direction based on?
Yeah.
Tell me that again, based on what Chase was saying.
Yeah, great question, Amy. So basically what's going to happen is as we're going through discussion, regardless of the direction the discussion goes, we'll eventually take it to a vote. And then if that item does fail in the vote, then we'll be able to introduce a new motion and put that to discussion and vote as well.
So should we already be seeing the survey question?
No, it should be on, you'll have it on Monday.
Okay. No, I mean, sorry. The vote. Should we already be seeing the thing pop up that we can vote?
Yeah, you should. Yeah, the poll should have popped up.
So if it has not, how do we indicate that it has not popped up for us?
Michaela, who does all of our technical wonders behind the scene, can probably help us out to make sure you get that, okay?
Okay.
And moving forward, if that problem does arise when we're voting on something for the report, just be sure to raise your hand or type in the chat or even comment through the main room that your system isn't working.
Tana, were you able to receive that yet?
Nope, it's not popping up. So I guess in the future, maybe if someone says it should be on your screen right now, then I will know whether to annoy someone about it being there or not. So.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it definitely should have popped up as a little dialog box.
If you're not seeing it pop up automatically on this bottom toolbar on Zoom, there's the three dots on the right that say more. If you click on those, the second thing down is polls. See if that helps.
Peyton, I think you are the only one that I don't think everyone has access to polls. I don't.
We continue
I
to
clicked it and it made no change.
Okay. We can continue to troubleshoot this. If you feel comfortable, please, you could vote and just privately message the chair, and then we can get that vote counted.
Okay, silly me. I found it. It popped up on my second monitor that was darkened. So when I woke up my second monitor, there it was.
Okay.
So now I know how to find it. Thank
Oh,
you.
beautiful.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to vote?
Awesome. It looks like that motion will pass. So we will proceed with those rules as we move into our different procedures for this process. So thank you all for going through that process. Kind of having some troubleshooting is good for this first motion that we made so that we can be more clear in the future moving forward. So that kind of helped us to get the flow of how we will conduct voting in the future and kind of got us prepared for what a real vote looks like.
All right, thank you, Ava. Does anybody have any final questions about these procedures or the final report or future meetings? Okay, if no questions, basically that's all we have for you this week. We wanted to spend a little time kind of outlining the processes that we were going to use. Remember, you're going to get a survey in your email on Monday of next week, and it'll have items that you can vote on, and then there's also going to be, as Jake reminded us, there's a place where you can put additional items that you would like represented on that survey. We really need you to have that survey filled out by Wednesday at the very latest so that we can have everything ready to roll by Thursday of next week. When we get back together on Thursday of next week, we're going to spend our first time going through our first policy recommendations. And again, if we are able to, we'll move a little bit faster and move through this process. Ava and I are extremely excited to jump into this next phase working with you to put this report together. And again, we just really appreciate everybody being here and engaging in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Great night.